Hello, and welcome to the Watcher's review of The Curse of Fenric, a tale of the Doctor bringing a game of chess played against an ancient evil to its conclusion at a military base during World War II. Please be aware there are potential spoilers ahead, but don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you can be alerted for more content. The Doctor and Ace arrive at a military base at Maiden's Point on the northeast coast of England in 1943 at the height of the Second World War, whilst posing as officials from the War Office in order to get a closer look at Dr. Judson's Ultima machine that is being used to decipher German-coded messages. Additionally, Judson is also trying to decipher Viking inscriptions, which will release an ancient evil entity known as Fenric, which the Doctor had trapped into a flask 1700 years earlier. Sylvester McCoy's stronger stories as the Seventh Doctor were, in my opinion, at their best when the Doctor is manipulating people and events, and The Curse of Fenric is perhaps the best example of this. The Doctor, as a character, comes into the storyline keeping his cards very close to his chest and not even letting Ace in on his full intentions. Both the Doctor and Ace enter the military base posing as officials from the War Office in order to gain the trust of everyone around them, such as Dr. Judson and Commander Millington, whilst having the freedom to explore and carry out his own agenda unhindered. From here, as the episodes progress, the Doctor's plan unfolds, as he is looking for the flask he trapped Fenric in, but also knowing that inevitably Fenric would escape in order to complete the chess puzzle that he posed to him in the 3rd century in Constantinople. Due to this, the Doctor, like Fenric, has resorted to use the characters in the story as chess pieces. In particular Ace, as he reveals towards the climax of the story that he saw Fenric's hand in bringing the Doctor and Ace together back in her debut story Dragonfire, when it turns out that Fenric created the time storm that sent her from Perivale to Iceworld. Additionally, the Doctor also references a scene from the previous season's story Silver Nemesis, in which he observed the chess set, which he knew was also Fenric's work. The Doctor throughout the story is almost seemingly acting like a chess player, in being 2 steps ahead of everyone else and being a manipulator, reluctantly knowing that he has to upset Ace by being hurtful towards her in order to defeat Fenric. At the story's conclusion, the Doctor reverts back to showing his true self and explains to Ace why he behaved like he did in order to defeat the entity and protect, most importantly, her from his manipulating tactics. His true feelings towards Ace can actually be traced back into a scene where the Doctor realises that having faith in something or someone acts as a psychic barrier to repel a herbivore attack. The Doctor's methods of faith by reciting companions starting with Susan, Ian and Barbara before the rest of the names eventually become inaudible. Although you don't hear the Doctor reciting Ace's name, it gives the impression the Doctor has placed trust in faith in the people he allows to travel with, as an indication of the power of her strong relationships, and perhaps none more so than Ace. The Doctor here doesn't resort to the use of gadgets or physically fixing or breaking things in order to save the day, but by merely outwitting his adversary. The behaviour of the Doctor initially being a manipulator fully started back in the previous season's story, Remembrance of the Daleks, which he showed a darker persona flourishing in his 3rd season throughout, where he is willing to take risks even with Ace, as he does in this story, Ghostlight and Survival, but as ever for the greater good. The Curse of Fenric is probably the best example of the Doctor's behaviour and fully demonstrates the complex relationship with Ace. Ace is arguably the most complex and fleshed out companion in all of Doctor Who, both classic and new series. A rebellious teenager originally from London who didn't get along with her mother and who found herself in the far future in another part of the universe when she first met the Doctor. The Doctor decided to take her under his wing, potentially knowing what her future had in store. Fearless and maturing into adulthood, Ace was far from your conventional companion, and season 26 presented itself as being much about her as it was the Doctor. In The Curse of Fenric, as we see the Doctor's manipulation and expectation of Fenric's emergence, it soon becomes clearer that the Doctor had to use and manipulate Ace in order to defeat him. Having realised Fenric's hand in bringing Ace and the Doctor together back in their debut story Dragonfire, he knows that by bringing Ace with him to the military base in 1943 would test their friendship. This is first presented when the Doctor and Ace meet radio operator Kathleen Dudman, who, due to not having childcare arrangements, was forced to bring her baby daughter to the military base, in which she was then given 24 hours notice by Commander Millington when he discovered this arrangement. Ace then became repulsed by Millington and formed a bond with Kathleen and her baby. However, she was initially put off by the baby when she was informed that her name is Audrey, which is also the name of Ace's mother. When the herbivores attack the military base, Ace helps her escape and gives her an address which she believed was her grandmother's in London for Kathleen and baby Audrey to take refuge. After their departure, Fenric reveals that Ace was a pawn in his game with the Doctor, and as such had inadvertently created a paradox in that the baby Audrey was actually Ace's own mother, and that sending Kathleen and Audrey to London kick-started events that led to Ace being born nearly 30 years later. As such, she becomes broken and angry with the Doctor since he always knew Fenric's influence all along, and that he knowingly contributed to Ace meeting her own mother as an infant, giving her a conflict of interest in loving her mother as a baby, but despising her as an adult. Despite this, her faith and belief in the Doctor in turn ends up preventing the Ancient One, a herbivore brought back in time by Fenric to destroy humanity, to betray and kill Fenric instead. In order to do this, the Doctor has to convince Ace to hate him by describing her as things such as an emotional cripple, which works in freeing the Ancient One. Eventually, the Doctor owns up to the risk he had to take with Ace in order to defeat Fenric, and as such admitted really that he wouldn't disown and upset her in the manner that he was presenting during the story. By the story's conclusion, the Doctor and Ace rekindle their friendship. This is a coming-of-age story for Ace, where she progresses from being a teenager into a young woman, by becoming at peace with the relationship with her mother, and then the Doctor after believing he betrayed her. Also, there is a nice point in the story when the guard needs distracting, and Ace uses flirtation techniques with the guard after telling the Doctor that she isn't a little girl anymore, something not really seen with the companions in Doctor Who during the classic era. The programme closes with Ace going for a swim in the sea, and symbolising her banishing of her own personal demons and emerging a more mature person. Dr. Judson is a mathematician working on the Ultima project, initially designed to crack the German-coded messages, but additionally used to solve the Viking inscriptions in the crypt at St. Jude's Church. Confined to a wheelchair due to an undisclosed accident in his youth, Judson is obsessed with his work, and is often short-tempered with people not on his level intelligence, but in awe of people who understand his work, such as the Doctor and Ace. He has a long-term friendship with Commander Millington, with the original idea that they were once lovers in their youth. However, this was deemed unsuitable for inclusion during the era of the show's broadcast. His work in solving the Viking inscriptions ultimately leads to Fenric's release, who then kills Judson and takes possession of his body. Writer Ian Briggs based the character of Judson on Alan Turing, who, like Judson, worked on solving German cipher codes. Despite Turing's real-life genius and work towards defeating Nazi Germany, Turing was homosexual and was convicted because of this, which led to his suicide in 1954. Because of homosexuality being illegal at the time, Briggs saw Turing as being restricted as a human being due to him not being allowed to freely express who he was. As mentioned before, the initial concept was that Judson was also to be homosexual, which wasn't allowed to be included in the story, so the concept of him being confined to a wheelchair instead acts as his form of restriction. Captain Sorin was a leader of the Soviet commando unit sent to steal the Ultima machine and return it to Moscow. It is suggested that he was selected based on him having an English grandmother, making him one of Fenric's wolves due to his ancestry links with the area. Despite his attempts to steal the Ultima machine, they actually aid the Doctor and Ace in particular, rescuing them from the herbivore attack on the church. Like the Doctor using his faith in companions, and Ace having faith in the Doctor, Sorin also uses faith as a psychic barrier in the form of his belief in the Russian. He strikes up a strong bond with Ace, with him being impressed with her bravery and skill, and with the added suggestion that there may be a mutual attraction between the two, and as such gives Ace his scarf and his Soviet badge insignia, which Ace would later use in the following story, Survival. When Judson's body becomes too weak for Fenric to inhibit, he kills Sorin and takes possession of his body to allow him to carry on trying to solve the Doctor's problem. Fenric is one of many names given to the ancient entity who is the primary antagonist in the story. Initially coming across the Doctor in the 3rd century in Constantinople, they played a game of chess and being locked in stalemate with the Doctor presenting a challenge that he could win with one move. The puzzle made Fenric weak, allowing the Doctor to take the opportunity to trap him into the flask and banish him into the dark dimension. Despite imprisonment, he was still able to summon the Ancient One from the future and recruit an army of herbivores to pursue the Vikings to England after they had stolen the flask. Eventually, the flask was buried in St. Jude's Church, with inscriptions being left warning of the flask being cursed. Despite his imprisonment, he was still powerful enough to set certain events in place for his release, including orchestrating the Doctor and Ace meeting each other at Iceworld in Dragonfire by creating a time storm that brought Ace from the 20th century, as well as controlling the herbivores. The inscriptions, once translated, acted as a means to release Fenric from the flask, and for him to find the host firstly in Judson and then with Sorin. Once solving the Doctor's chess puzzle, in which the solution was inadvertently given to him by Ace, he then planned to summon the Ancient One once again to distribute the chemical weapons stored at the military base to kill everyone on Earth. The beauty of the character of Fenric is that he only makes his physical appearance in the final episode. His notoriety in mythos is conveyed through his legend, his apparent manipulations of events prior to this story, and his ability to control the herbivores. The disadvantage of having a godlike antagonist in Doctor Who is that the more screen exposure they have, the lesser the threat they carry. The tactic of reduced or limited screen time for godlike characters in Doctor Who is also used for Sutekh in the Pyramids of Mars, and the White and Black Guardians in the 4th Doctor's Key to Time season, and Mordrin Undead, Terminus and Enlightenment featuring the 5th Doctor. For simplicity too, his actual physical presence is presented by his means of using dead characters as hosts, in this case Judson and Sorin, but by highlighting the difference of giving them both glowing eyes, and in Judson's case, making him able to walk again. In all, 75% of the story is a build-up to his eventual reveal, by learning about his capabilities and how he uses others to carry out his work, making a reveal at the end of episode 3 a great build to the character's entrance, and ensuring that episode 4 suitably wraps up the story and allowing Fenric to have enough screen time without diminishing his threat and influence. Secondary antagonist Commander Millington is in charge of the military base at Maiden's Point, and is a character hell-bent on winning the war at any cost. He allows the use of the Ultima machine to crack the Viking inscriptions, as he believes it will lead to treasure that will win the war. He foresees another war emerging with the Soviets once the Second World War is won. To prevent this from happening, he has conjured a plot where he ensures that the Soviet Union have found out about the Ultima machine, which leads to Sorin and his commandos on their mission to Maiden's Point. Once the Ultima machine is back in Moscow, a chemical weapon that has been installed will be dispersed when the word love is deciphered. Obsessed to the point of having his office replicated as the German Naval Cipher Office in Berlin to allow him to get into the Nazi mindset, Millington is willing to let many people on both sides of the war die in order of the name of victory. Ultimately, he is killed by one of the Soviet commandos when he accuses his own captain of betrayal. In regards to personality, he is very cold in understanding individual needs, in particular dismissing Kathleen due to her having no option but to bring the baby to the base. He is also sexist, in particular with Ace, due to initially not believing Judson's claims that she understands logic codes and not allowing her to see the laboratory where the chemical weapons are being manufactured, purely down to the fact that she's female. One of the great things about the Curse of Fenric is that every speaking character has a purpose and a part to play. As well as the already mentioned, you have the Reverend Wainwright, played by game show host Nicholas Parsons, who is the vicar of St. Jude's, but has lost his faith in religion and God upon his sadness of the British bombing on German cities in retaliation. His loss of faith later acts towards his demise when failing to produce a psychic barrier from the herbivores. Also, you have the herbivores, which I have already spoken a bit about without much divulgence. Herbivores are the vampiric servants of Fenric, who represent a possible future of human mutation through pollution. They also have the power to convert other humans into their form, and as such are represented as two different forms. The initial form is of the recently converted herbivores, who still resemble human appearance, albeit with pale skin, red lips and long fingernails. These are mainly represented by two evacuee teenagers, Jean and Phyllis, who Ace initially befriended, but are converted when they are pulled underwater while swimming in the sea. From there, they then lead the more advanced herbivores and kill Mrs. Hardacre, who they were living with, and the Reverend Wainwright when they realise he has lost his faith. They still return their thoughts and power of speech, which is why they are able to confront and communicate with other characters. Later on, the female operators, apart from Kathleen, are converted too. The more advanced form of the herbivores is that of the creature unable to speak, with suckers on their skin due to them lying dormant in the sea. They are more feral than Jean and Phyllis, but are in greater numbers. The Ancient One is also similar in appearance, but seemingly more intelligent and non-feral. The Ancient One is tasked by Fenric to take the chemical weapons from the military base and disperse them through the sea, thus destroying humanity. The Doctor manages to get the Ancient One to realise that Fenric is attempting to trick him due to his potential actions, altering his own creation in the future. By then making Ace drop her own psychic barrier by losing faith in the Doctor, the Ancient One is allowed to exert revenge on Fenric by using the chemical weapons to poison each other. The Curse of Fenric was writer Ian Briggs' second contribution to Doctor Who, following on from Ace's introductory story Dragonfire in 1987. Here, he takes themes from several influences for the story to give it more dimension and layer plotting. Most notably, you have influence from John Carpenter's 1980 horror film The Fog, in the form of the representation of the herbivores emerging from the sea and lurking in clouds of fog. Also, their emergence from the sea also comes across as a nod to the infamous scene in the third Doctor story The Sea Devils in 1972, where the titular creatures emerge in a similar manner to the herbivores. Dracula is also a noticeable influence, with the herbivores having vampiric tendencies, and with Jean and Phyllis also using seduction to lure a Soviet soldier to his death, much in the same manner as Dracula would. Also, the setting of Maiden's Point is meant to be on the coast of northeast England, which is also the location of the Yorkshire town of Whitby, where Dracula arrives in the original novel. Norse mythology also plays a big role in the story, not only with the Viking inscriptions, but with the concept of Fenric, drawing from the legend of Ragnarok and the wolf monster Fenrir, whose story foretold the death of the god Odin. Ian Briggs also admitted that the concept of the Ancient One was subconsciously based on the 1976 film The Man Who Fell to Earth, starring David Bowie, where an alien travels to Earth to initially save his family back on his drought-ridden home planet, whereas the Ancient One was summoned by Fenric from polluted future Earth and conned by Fenric into thinking his actions would save his own future. Faith also plays a huge role in the story, which follows on from the Dracula links, where he was repelled by faith in God. As previously mentioned, many characters have their faith tested throughout the story, with differing effects. Ecology is another theme in regards to the possible future Earth the Ancient One was brought from, and that was destroyed by pollution, and as such made humans evolve. Connotations of war are apparent not just in the story's setting, but also with the Doctor and Fenric using other innocent people as their tools in order to try and defeat one another, much in the same way as military leaders and politicians. Ian Briggs cleverly entwines all these themes and elements in varying degrees to give the story depth and richness. As such, this gives opportunity to have more meaning to the characters in the story. The story itself acts like an onion, with the mood becoming darker, with the further revelations of the battle of wits between the Doctor and Fenric, and how they manipulate people as you work through the layers throughout the story, before arriving at the climax. This makes the story compact and full of data, which completely does away with any padding, and making every word and action Briggs brings to the script more important and meaningful. The Curse of Fenric was director Nicholas Mallett's third contribution to Doctor Who, following from the Mysterious Planet segment from 1986's Trial of the Time Lord and 1987's Paradise Towers, neither of which are memorable stories, but that is as much down to the scripts as much as anything else. As such, The Curse of Fenric serves as a good example of what a director can do with a strong script. Whilst the filming was pretty standard, Mallet's biggest influence on the story was him convincing producer John Nathan Turner into filming the whole story on location instead of using BBC studios for interior shots. This had previously done before with stories, but were forced decisions. Spearhead from Space from 1970 was filmed entirely on location due to a strike by studio cameramen. The Suntown Experiment in 1975 was set entirely outdoors and therefore had to be shot on location, whilst The Greatest Show in the Galaxy in 1988 had to shoot the tent scenes on the BBC car park. With The Curse of Fenric though, this was a conscious decision submitted by Mallet for effectiveness and possibly a reduction in cost. As such, due to the lack of necessity of building sets for interior shots, we were presented with a realistic looking setting, primarily with the military base and St Jude's Church. Even the underwater shoots were carried out at sea rather than using a pool. The show would replicate the entirely on location principle with the next story, Survival. The actual location shooting mostly took place around the village of Hawkhurst in Kent, not far from the border with East Sussex where other portions of the show were filmed. The only exception to these two locations was Lulworth Cove in Dorset, some 170 miles away, for the Maiden's Bay beach scenes, which wasn't far from some of the location shots required for the story Survival. Mark Ayres supplied the music for The Curse of Fenric, having previously done The Greatest Show in the Galaxy and Ghostlight, and was used as an alternative for regular 7th Doctor music provider Keith McCulloch. Here, Ayres draws away somewhat from the synthesised heady soundtracks that dominated the 80s and adopted a mix of instrumentation for The Curse of Fenric. By and large, the music is gloomy and atmospheric to fit the tone of the story. When the herbivores attack, you get short, high-range synthesised chord strikes for the added tension. That's not to say the entire soundtrack is atmospheric, as Ayres manages to fit in a section of Glenn Miller's In the Mood to symbolise the Second World War setting, and some more upbeat music during the Doctor and Ace's heart-to-heart moments. Although this was Mark Ayres' final contribution to an episode, he has gone on since to restore the soundtracks of certain Doctor Who episodes for their DVD release, as well as writing music for some of the making-of documentaries. The soundtrack for The Curse of Fenric was the first soundtrack for Doctor Who to be made available for general purchase, and I think it's a great example of the style of music used for the show during that era. Had classic Doctor Who had carried on beyond season 26 and into the 90s, then no doubt Mark Ayres would have been used more often. The Curse of Fenric was broadcast between October the 25th to the 15th of November 1989 as part of the penultimate story of not only season 26, but the whole of classic Doctor Who. Due to the ratings not improving, producer John Nathan Turner suspected that the show would be going off air for a slightly longer period than usual, but by August 1990, the decision had been made by the BBC to officially close the Doctor Who production office, which left the show off air for nearly 16 years until 2005, with the exception of the 1996 one-off TV movie starring Paul McGann. For me, the story is an absolute classic, and if this was an example of the direction the show was heading for in the future, then it might have been brighter had it not been taken off air. In my opinion, it contains so many classic well-used features that have worked in Doctor Who: horrific monsters launching an attack on a base, a godlike villain with incredible powers, and an Earth period setting for added intensity. But it also contains new elements primarily in the tone, as it dealt with issues not only associated with the show in the past. Primarily this is centred around Ace maturing into a young woman, and the Doctor becoming a manipulator and cunning, while still remaining the hero. There was a lot of content that wasn't included in the original broadcast cut of The Curse of Fenric. Some of what was filmed was added to the 1991 VHS release of the story by director Nicholas Mallet and John Nathan Turner. This was again released with a DVD edition in 2003 with a remixed soundtrack and added CGI effects. In my personal opinion, there isn't much to fault with The Curse of Fenric. The story, acting, and the way it was filmed is absolutely brilliant. The added bonus of it having a period setting and shot entirely on location means that the story doesn't suffer from aging or budget limitations, and as such, still stands the test of time today. The idea of a story arc being present without audience initial awareness was a stroke of genius, and manages to tie up a lot of anomalies of the 7th Doctor's era, and therefore makes this story arguably the most important and pivotal during Sylvester McCoy's tenure as the Doctor. Story arc wasn't something new to Doctor Who, and had been used with the likes of the Key to Time and the Trial of the Time Lord seasons. However, these were arcs self-contained in a single season, and not across several stories, and comes as one of the shock moments when it is realised in episode 4. Nowadays we are used to underlining story arcs in the new series, whether it would be the Bad Wolf arc from 2005 to the Cracks in Time story arc that was present throughout the 11th Doctor's tenure. But back in the late 80s this was something fresh to the show that had been on air continuously for 26 years and breathed new life, albeit briefly. How much influence, if any, Russell T Davies and Stephen Moffat took from the Fenric story arc when establishing their own is unknown, but it showed that no matter how old and tired Doctor Who may look after a certain period of time, it'll always be capable of producing fresh ideas and new concepts, which goes a long way in why it has been on our screens for all this time. So, that concludes my review on the Curse of Fenric. Of course, it is only my opinion, so feel free to express your own in the comments if you think differently. Be sure to tune in for my next video, but if you do have a suggestion for a story for me to review, then just let me know. But remember, it's the end, but the moment has been prepared for.